Hello students, this is an awareness session for the revised pattern of IES regarding current issues of national and international importance relating to social, economic and industrial development. The marks for these topics may range from 5 to 15%, that is 10 to 30 marks, but what we can expect is around 20 marks questions from the current issues. Let's now quickly do a topic-wise overview and analysis for the current issues and the current affairs and how we need to go about it. Let's first look at social development. What is the scope of the subject? What exactly do you mean by social development? What are the areas you need to study? The background of various topics, what are the basic concepts, the important terminology, the current issues, the important facts and figures, and of course, the government policies. So broadly, when we talk about background areas of social development, what exactly do we mean by these background areas? We can categorize them broadly into these four areas. Like we can talk about the various sectors, which like are education, health, agriculture, poverty, unemployment, so on and so forth. So the various sectors, what are the recent current affairs, the recent trends that are happening, the background understanding of these areas covers the sectoral part. Let's come to people. When we talk about social development, we're talking about society, wherein the people in the society. So they play a very important role in social development. So what are the various areas you have to look under people? You have to include women, children, the old aged, the marginalized sections, the vulnerable sections, displaced people, minorities, subsidies that are given for social development, and the corporate social responsibility activities. So these broadly can be covered under people. Let's come to area. The various areas under social development. You talk about rural areas, you talk about urban areas, tribal areas, smart cities, and recently now we are talking about urban areas, which is nothing but providing urban facilities in rural areas. So you need to keep yourself updated about all these areas in the society. Then the fourth section we're looking at is the environment section. Now when we talk about environment, how does it relate to social development? Because when we talk about environment, we can look at it from two angles. One, you can look at it from a subject like environment and ecology, where you're looking at the technicalities of environment and ecology. But here when we are talking about environment, we talk about the social angle of environment. Like for example, forest rights, the Environment Act, land acquisition, these kind of things which environment related to society. So broadly, these are the background areas of social development. Now across all these areas, what you need to keep in mind is always the government schemes, the bills and acts which are announced by the government. You need to know them. Let's now know or try and understand what exactly do I mean by background understanding. Let's take an example. Human Development Index. What is this? It is an index to measure development. Now, what do I mean by this? Economic development. What is economic development? What is economic growth? When we talk about growth, we just talk about the number, the output. It is just quantity. What is the total production in the country? That is economic growth. But when we are talking about development, we have to consider not only the quantitative aspects, but also the qualitative aspects. So when I say quality, how do you capture that? So there are three indicators to measure development, which is health, education, standard of living. So these three indicators are the components of Human Development Index. The United Nations Development Program ranks economies and or countries based on these parameters on a scale of 0 to 1. The Human Development Report, which is published by the UNDP, it includes, what does it include? the development issues in various countries, what are the trends, the policies, and all these things are given by this in this report by UNDP. Now, what else under HDR? Around 188 countries, and apart from Human Development Index, there are other indices also in the Human Development Report, which are Gender Development Index, Gender Inequality Index, Multidimensional Poverty Index, wherein gender development captures about the gender issues, male versus female, what is the development between the disparity between the two, the inequality index regarding opportunities and regarding health and employment, what is the inequality between the male and the female. And when we talk about multidimensional poverty index, it captures poverty in a multidimensional approach. Now let's look at what is the current issues regarding what background we have studied. With the background knowledge of this HDI, the current issue is the UNDP has published their report and India is ranking 130 with a 0.609 HDI, and we fall in the category of medium developed countries. And India's gender development is around 0.795, India's gender inequality index, we are at around 0.563, and we rank 130 among 155 countries. And regarding multidimensional poverty index, 55.3% of our population is multidimensionally poor. Let's quickly look at a sample question based on this background understanding. Consider the following statements related to HDR 2015 and select the correct ones or one using the code below. So there are three statements given. The first statement talks about the index, the rank, right? The second one talks about India is below Bangladesh and Pakistan. And the third one is the report studies 188 countries and provides an annual ranking based on HDI. So you have to select the correct one. So the correct one here, obviously the first statement is wrong. India doesn't rank below Bangladesh and Pakistan. And here we have the answer is only 3. That's the B option. Let's take another example. Now that was regarding people, the development aspect. Let's look at one of the government schemes. Jal Gram Yojana is one of the most important activity of the Jal Kranti Abhiyan of the Ministry of Water Resources, River Development and the Ganga Rejuvenation, under which 2 villages in every district are being selected as Jal Grams. So basically we're talking about water, we're talking about conservation, we're talking about management and all that, how sustainable utilization of water. Look at that word sustainable. When we talk about sustainable, it doesn't mean over a period of time, but sustainable means development not at the cost of destruction of the environment. That is the real meaning of sustainable. So here you need to understand the terminology, right? As we were talking about important concepts as well as understanding terminology. Let's look at a sample question. With reference to Jal Gram Yojana, which of the following statements are incorrect? So we're talking about incorrect. Keep in mind, it's a negative, it's a negation, right? Incorrect. It is a scheme under Jal Kranti Abhiyan. Under this scheme, 2 villages will be selected from every district in the country for all-round development of water resources. Obviously, both are right. So it's both 1 and 2. I hope you all are getting an idea of how you need to connect the background study and how questions can appear from the current issue which you have studied. Let's look at another one. The recently launched Project Sunrise associated with the states of Northeast India is a program by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare that will complement the region's National AIDS Control Program. A Stand Up India sub-scheme for the region launched by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. A mission mode project initiated by the Ministry of Railways to connect all 8 state capitals by 2019. A mission mode project initiated by the Ministry of Power to generate surplus electricity in the region by 2019. Now look at this question. All the options are so close. They look if you're going by the process of negation, you probably may not reach to the answer until and unless you have actually studied that particular current issue. So please do not try and guess these kind of questions, because your guess might be a wrong one. So the answer is A. It is a program that will complement the region's national AIDS control program. Let's look at another one. The Ministry of Ayush has the mandate to promote, propagate and globalize recognized traditional and complementary systems of medicine, which include, the options are given: naturopathy, Unani, Siddha, Saurikpa, homeopathy. What is the correct answer? Right. So Ayush is a full form of Ayurveda. A is Ayurveda, yoga and naturopathy is Y, U is Unani, S is Siddha, H is homeopathy. So obviously it is 1, 2, 3 and 5. That is the option D. So Saurikpa is not in the picture of Ayush. Let's look at another question. Which of the following statements is not correct? So there was recent news about the Employees Provident Fund, and what is it? An Employees Provident Fund account is termed as inoperative if there has been no fresh accretion into it for 2 or more years. So if the fund doesn't get, that's what the meaning is, right? For 2 or more years, it is termed to be inoperative. Second option, entire unclaimed balances in inoperative accounts cannot be withdrawn by the respective account holder till they turn 58 years of age. Deposits into every EPF account are made by the employer as well as the employee. EPF contributions are mandated only for those earning up to rupees 15,000 a month. So we are talking here about which of these is not correct. So the options B, C and D are correct. The statement A here, it is not 2 years, but it has to be 3 years. So that is answer is A. So this was all in the current news. Right. So with that we finish to understand what do you mean by social development. Now let's look at economic development. So current issues on economic development, how do you study that? When you look at economic development, you can broadly categorize them into national and international. Obviously, the national economic development, what comes into it? You're going to look at the various sectors of the economy, of the Indian economy, then the macroeconomic development trends that are happening in the country. In the international, what you precisely need to know, obviously you cannot study every country what is happening, but at the broad level, you need to know what are the international institutions which are playing an important role in economic development of the world. Then you look at agreements, what are the various international agreements for promoting economic development, the summits, the important economic summits that happen, and please make a note that all bilateral, multilateral issues, all these things have to definitely be covered when you are studying summits and when you are studying international areas. Now first let's focus on national economic development. So as I said, when we are looking at the different sectors of the Indian economy, it is the primary sector, the secondary sector and the tertiary sector. So primary sector includes the agriculture sector, the allied activities of agriculture, what are the recent trends that are happening. Secondary sectors, you have the manufacturing, the industrial sector, what is happening, the current trends or the economic development that is happening in these sectors. And tertiary sector is the services sector. So what are the economic development activities that are taking place in these 3 sectors become important for us. Then when you look at macroeconomic development, you broadly, in order to understand, in order to appreciate the current issues regarding the economic features or the macroeconomic factors, you need to understand national income concepts like what is GDP, what is GNP, these kind of national income concepts, per capita income. Inflation, we are talking about, you need to understand how inflation plays a role, how does it affect the economy of the country. Banking and money, a very, very important area wherein you're looking at banking, the banking sector, how does it affect the economy, how money is circulated in the markets. Then you look at financial markets, a broad overview of the financial markets. You're talking about equity markets, share markets, right? Capital markets, money markets. What are all these things? Because the recent economic developments, because you have to understand what the foreign direct investments, what are foreign institutional investments. So a brief idea about all this. Then you look at public finance. When you're talking about public finance, you talk about what is the income of the government, what is the expenditure. We're talking about various kinds of deficits here, like fiscal deficits, revenue deficits. You need to have a broad conceptual understanding so that current affairs, when you read them, you understand exactly what it means. And external trade, of course, we are talking about exports, we're talking about imports, the balance of payments between them, these concepts. So with this conceptual understanding of the sectoral development and macroeconomic development, it gives you a clear picture to pick out relevant information regarding the national issues on economic development. Now let's understand the background of economic development. Certain examples have been given here. Let's say now we are talking about the Startup India program. So the Prime Minister has announced an action plan for startups to help in development of entrepreneurship culture in India. That's called the Startup India program. Then what is Stand Up India program? See, subtle details also matters. Startup India is different from Stand Up India. Stand Up India is, again, it talks about the entrepreneurship culture, but this is for SESTs and women entrepreneurs in the country. So that's why it is combinedly called as the Startup India, Stand Up India program. Let's look at the next current affair background. Devaluation of Chinese yuan. Yuan is the currency of China. But let us first understand what is the meaning of devaluation. Devaluation means lowering of a currency, the value of a currency against any other currency. In this case, let's take an example of lowering of the value of the Chinese currency, that is yuan, in comparison with a dollar. Now, they have lowered. What does that mean? When $1, let's say, was 6 yuan, now it has become $1, let's say for example, has become 10 yuan. So from 6 to 10, that is called as devaluation. The value has been devalued. Now, what is the impact of that? It has triggered a global financial turmoil, hurting stock and currency markets worldwide because they have lowered their currency. Now, why did they have to do this devaluation? Because there was a less demand for goods at world market. So whatever production was happening, the surplus production, there was surplus production, and the demand for whatever Chinese goods were being produced, there was a less demand at the world market. That was one of the reasons. The second reason why they had to devaluate is because there was a slowdown in the economy. Obviously, there is a slowdown because the demand for the goods or the Chinese goods, the demand for that has lowered. Therefore, there is a slowdown in the Chinese economy. The third reason is now they want to boost their exports. They want to build their economy. Therefore, to make the prices, to make it more competitive, they have devalued their currency. So this is a basic explanation of why the currency has been devalued in China. Let's now look at the next background. Why crude oil prices are falling. Now, what are the reasons for these steep fall in oil prices globally? Number one, shale gas oil explorations in US. So the new oil explorations, which means there is increase in production of oil. Next one, high production by oil producing countries surpassing demand. Now, what is the meaning of this? Oil producing countries, the production is higher. This is the theory of economics. What happens when the production is high and the demand is low? Obviously, prices fall. So that is one of the reasons why oil prices are falling. The third reason is lifting of sanctions on Iran leading to a production boom. So again, we are talking about increase in production. So increase in production, that is supply is more and the demand is less. That leads to fall in the prices. Let us look at a few sample questions based on these understanding. Devaluation of currency leads to, so we are talking about devaluation, right? Fall in domestic prices, increase in domestic prices, no impact on domestic prices, erratic fluctuations in domestic prices. Mind you, here we are talking about domestic prices. We are not talking about exports. That you have to keep in mind. So what's the answer? Increase in domestic prices. Let's look at how is this possible devaluation, how is it leading to increase in domestic prices? That is, how the domestic prices are becoming costlier, whereas exports are becoming cheaper. Let's look at that. Devaluation helps in boosting exports. As we discussed, it helps in because the prices in the world markets are becoming cheaper, but imports in that country are becoming costlier, and we'll understand this taking an example of oil price. Let's take for example 1 liter of oil is costing, let's say, 6 yuan, and because of devaluation now 1 liter is costing 10 yuan, 6 to 10, that is devaluation. Now what is the meaning of this? It means that there is an increase in the oil price. That is, China had to shell out only 6 yuan previously, now it has to shell out 10 yuan to procure that 1 liter oil. Which, what does it happen? It is reflecting in the increase in transportation costs for China. Obviously, because of the increase in transportation costs, that will reflect in the cost of goods will be increased in their domestic markets. Let's look at the next question. The broad-based trade and investment agreement often seen in the news is a bilateral free trade between India and European Union, the negotiations for which are ongoing, a multilateral free trade deal between the SAARC nations, right, and the EU, the negotiations which are ongoing, a free trade deal between India and NAFTA, and India's proposal for participation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal. So this is a recent one, and when we are talking now, conceptually, what are the things you need to know here? You need to understand what do you mean by a bilateral free trade? What do you mean by a multilateral free trade? What is a free trade deal? What is a European Union? What is NAFTA? What is a Trans-Pacific Partnership deal? So this again is a background understanding. With that knowledge, you will be able to answer this question. So the answer is, it's a bilateral free trade which is going on between India and the European Union. Let's look at the next question. Let's look at an assertion reasoning type of a question. What is an assertion? What is the assertion statement? In order to compare the GDP figures of the same country at different points of time, we take the help of real GDP. Now, when you're doing national income concepts, that's when you study about real GDP and the concepts behind it. Reason statement. The goods purchased by consumers do not represent all the goods which are produced in a country. Which of the above statements is or are true? Now, how do you answer these kind of an assertion reasoning questions? If A and R, that is the assertion statement and the reasoning statement, if both are true and R is the explanation of A, then you mark the first option, which is the A. If both are true but R is not the correct explanation of A, then you mark B. If A is correct and R is incorrect, then it is C. And if A is incorrect and R is correct, you mark D. So the answer here is B. Both are true but R is not the reason for A. Let's move on to the next one. Which of the following is true about Commonwealth of Nations? All the member countries must have a British colonial past. Nepal is also a part of the Commonwealth of Nations. Now, which of the following is true is what they are asking. British colonial, obviously the Commonwealth of Nations, the British colonies were part of it, but the question here is all the member countries must have a British colonial past, which is not right. So therefore the answer is neither 1 nor 2. Let's move on to the next question. Match list 1 with list 2 and select the correct answer using the codes given below. So here we have a list of all the international organizations, and when you go through the international organizations, what they do, you need to understand that. So you have WTO, IDA, IMF, IBRD, and what exactly these institutions are associated with. So WTO, the World Trade Organization, obviously it's for multi-trade. IDA, International Development Assistance, it forwards soft loans. IMF, International Monetary Fund, it gives loans and addresses balance of payment problems. IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So the option here, the answer is B, right? So when you study international organizations, you need to understand how they are linked. Let's move on now to the various sectors of the Indian economy. Let's look at the agricultural sector. So again, when you're looking at the agriculture sector, one of the most important sectors of the Indian economy, we can categorize that. What exactly do you need to know in the agriculture sector? You can broadly categorize them into three broad areas: the institutional part of the agriculture sector, the infrastructure part of the agriculture sector, the allied activities of agriculture, the current issues regarding these three areas. So if you look at the institutional part, what are the credit institutions for the agriculture sector? Marketing, how the marketing, what does the government initiative for the marketing of the agriculture produce? Warehousing, food processing, the extension services, insurance, food security, all these come under the institutional part of the agriculture sector. Look at the infrastructure part. You're talking about seeds, fertilizers, irrigation, power, pesticides. So this is the important areas which come under the infrastructure for the agriculture sector. The allied activities of agriculture, which includes like horticulture, organic farming, poultry, animal husbandry, and the revolutions that have happened. So all these, the current trends, the recent developments, any news on these regarding the agriculture sector should be enough to broadly cover the agriculture sector. Let's look at sample questions from the agriculture sector. The Government of India is promoting biofertilizers through which of the following schemes? So you need to have the knowledge about the various schemes in the agriculture sector, the recent ones. National Mission of Sustainable Development, Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, Rashtriya Krishi Vikas Yojana, National Mission on Oil Seeds and Oil Palm. Biofertilizers, India is promoting through all these programs. So the answer is D. Let's move on to the next question. The term blue water refers to fresh surface and groundwater, the precipitation of land that does not run off or recharge the groundwater but is stored in the soil or temporarily stays on top of the soil, the relatively clean waste water from baths, sinks, washing machines and other such home appliances, ocean water. Now this kind of a question, you obviously cannot take a chance of guessing, right, until and unless you have understood the terminology and the concept of blue water. The answer is it is fresh water and fresh surface and groundwater. Let's move on to the next. Industrial development. Now we are going to cover what are the areas you need to understand or have knowledge about in the industrial development. The current affairs on industrial development, what are the background areas of industrial development. Broadly again, you can categorize them into policies, what are the various categories of industries, trade and energy and infrastructure. Let's look at policies. So what exactly you need to know about policies? What are the different industrial policy resolutions that are by the government? What are the government initiatives, the various schemes, disinvestment, mergers and acquisitions, all these kinds of things come under policies. Categorization, right? What are MSMEs, micro, small, medium companies, large companies, what are core industries, current affairs related to all these, right? Public sector units, what is index for industrial production. So these types of current news under categories of industries. Then let's come to trade. What agreements on trade, what you talk about like FERA and FEMA, what is FDI, what is a special economic zone, what is an NIMZ, what is industrial and economic corridors, trade agreements, all these current affairs regarding trade. And a very, very important sector or very important area for engineers, the energy and infrastructure sector. So what is the power generation in the country? What are the current issues related to power generation? Transportation systems, what exactly, because infrastructure, energy and infrastructure is the backbone for economic development of the country, right? So what are the recent trends? Public-private partnerships, foreign direct investment. So broadly these areas, if you are able to touch upon the recent trends and the current affairs news, it would be a good knowledge for you to attempt the general studies questions. Let's look at background. Let's take the first one, like Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gram Jyoti Yojana. What exactly is this scheme about? It is launched by the Ministry of Power to augment power supply to rural areas and to strengthen the sub-transmission and distribution systems. So that is the program DDUJY. So to electrify, mind you, it's only rural areas and not urban. It's only for rural electrification. It focuses on feeder separation and strengthening of sub-transmission and distribution infrastructure, including metering at all levels in rural areas. It will help in providing round-the-clock power to rural households and adequate power to agriculture consumers. So this is the background about how you need to study about a particular scheme. Let's look at few sample questions. The Deen Dayal Upadhyay Gram Jyoti Yojana, A, focuses on feeder separation, rural households and agriculture. B, seeks to electrify rural and urban areas that have hitherto not had access to electricity. C, will nationalize all power distribution companies in rural areas. D, seeks to provide uninterrupted power supply to industries set up in rural areas. So obviously the answer is A, focuses on feeder separation, rural households and agriculture. Now it is not D because uninterrupted power supply is fine, but nowhere it has been mentioned that it is for industries that are set up in rural areas. Other true are outrightly wrong. So this is how you use your background knowledge to answer this kind of a question. Let's move on to the next one. There's an assertion reasoning question. India's trade deficit with China has been worsening over the past few years and continues to worsen. China today requires lower quantities of raw materials from India, while Indian imports from China have not been affected much. So as we previously discussed the assertion reasoning question, the answer is A and R both are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. Let's move on to the next question. The Government of India has not recently signed with which of the following countries agreements in the field of peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Now this is one area, nuclear energy, where a lot of agreements and lot of current events are happening. So India has not recently signed. So Government of Australia, Government of UK, Britain and North Ireland, Government of China, none of the above. So the answer is, the question is not recently signed. So India has not signed an agreement with China. Other countries we have signed. Let's move on to the next one. The Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas recently released the Hydrocarbon Vision 2030 for Northeast India document outlining steps to leverage the hydrocarbon sector for development of the region. The states not covered by it include, now because they're talking about Northeast India, obviously the 7 sister states are already there. Apart from that, Sikkim has also been included in the Northeastern region for development purpose, right? So obviously West Bengal is not covered, and the answer is A. With this, students, I finish a brief presentation of how you have to go about in studying current affairs, and aspirants, all the very best, and please enjoy the process of studying current affairs in your preparation. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirima ma'am. Dear students, I hope you have got some overall idea of the topic, the current issues included in the revised scheme and pattern of UPSC engineering services with effective from 2017. Of course, to understand any subject, there will be some backbone concepts. Some of you may be thinking that current affairs is just the latest information, but as Nilima madam told, for everything there is some background. ESE will always be in the forefront to give the support to the student community. Our team of subject experts, not only in the engineering domain, but even in the general studies front, depending upon the latest pattern, is well equipped. We are ready with the study material, and we are going to give, as far as these current issues are concerned, monthly in the form of booklets with the sample questions, which will be exactly similar to the UPSC pattern. To win the race, join ESE.